Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockers Club. It's motherboard time. Okay, this is really cool. We've got the MPG Z790 carbon Wi-Fi from MSI, and I'll be comparing that to the MPG Z690 carbon Wi-Fi. So we'll sort of look at the two and see what the Z790 brings to the table. I've already gotten it out of the box, and I'll actually show an overhead view of the two motherboards here in a moment so you can sort of compare them and see what the differences are. We'll also be using an Intel Core i9, if you can see there, 13900K for the CPU, and we will also be using the new MPG A1000G, supports PCIe 5, 1000 watt power supply, also from MSI. And now you can look at the two motherboards sort of side by side, an overhead view. You can see the Z690 on the left and the Z790 on the right. And as you scan back and forth between the two motherboards, you can see there are some subtle differences, but the overall layout is basically the same. What probably stands out the most is the PCIe slot arrangement. The 690 has 3 full-size slots, whereas the Z790 has 2 full-size slots and a small one in the center between the two. The arrangement of the M.2 slots, the Z690 has 5 and the Z790 has 5. The big difference on the Z790, it has a Gen 5, a single Gen 5 slot for the M.2, and we'll look at that here in a little bit. The other differences are, and I like this, on the Z690, the USB header right next to the 24-pin ATX power connector at the upper right, it is in the same orientation as the power connector, so it's basically sticking out, whereas the same header on the Z790 is facing to the right, and that seems to go a lot better, or a lot more smoothly when you're trying to get your USB cable connected. I like them when they come in from the side. You don't have to bend it as much. But other than that, there's really nothing drastic between the two. It's just a nice refresh going from the 690 to the 790. Now next we'll look at the I/O panel. And this image shows the two sort of stacked on top of each other. The Z790 is on top and the 690 is on the bottom. And they look very similar, sort of. On the right hand side they are actually, but as we move more toward the left, that's where the changes begin. And these are both Wi-Fi 6E capable motherboards, which is good. But one thing that I notice is the Z790 does not have a display port. It only has an HDMI port, whereas the 690 has a display port and an HDMI port. What also is interesting is on the, and actually let me move to this next slide here. It's basically a little better map so you can sort of see what's going on. But back to the 790, if you look on the left, you can see there is a separate section that has a clear CMOS button, flash BIOS button, and a smart button, all dedicated off to the side there. The other difference is on the Z790 we have 2 of the Gen 2 USB 3.2 ports Type C, whereas the 690 only has 1. The Z690 has a stack of USB 2.0 ports, whereas the Z790 does not. It has 2 of the USB 3.2 Gen 1 5 gigabits per second Type A ports, the 2 blue ones there stacked on top of each other right above the HDMI port. They both have the USB 3.2 Gen 2 10 gigabits a second Type A ports, so they both have 5 of those. And actually, now that I look, I didn't catch this earlier, but the Z790 has an additional USB 3.2 Gen 2 10 gigabits per second Type A port. So the Z690 has 5 of those ports, the Z790 actually has 6. And the next slide here shows the specifications compared between the two. The Z790 is on the left and the Z690 is on the right. The CPU support, of course the Z790 is going to support both 12th and 13th generation Intel Core processors, while the Z690 only supports the 12th. However, there are BIOS updates that should remedy that, so you should be able to use 12th and 13th generation processors on the Z690 and the 790. So of course they are both LGA 1700 on the socket. Chipset, of course, Z790 versus Z690. The expansion slots, or the graphics interface, when you look at the two, it sort of makes sense why the Z690 has two PCIe 5.0 by 16 slots, and the Z790 only has one 5.0 by 16 slot, because the Z790 makes up for it with an M.2 Gen 5 slot. So you sort of have a trade-off there. But really anymore these days, you know, how many people run more than one graphics card at a time? You know, there are people who do that, but it's not nearly as common as it used to be. The display interface is the same between the two, providing you have a processor that supports the onboard graphics. Memory support, they're both 4 DIMMs. Dual channel DDR5, we get a nice bump up to 7600 plus megahertz on the Z790. And moving down to storage, of course, we'll look at that in a little more detail on the slots for your M.2. Both have 6 SATA ports. Your USB ports, we sort of went over that already, looking at the I/O panel. The LAN ports, you've both of these have the 2.5 gig ports, which is good, and again Wi-Fi 6E capable, Bluetooth 5.2, and the audio is both the same, 8-channel 7.1 HD with Audio Boost 5. Alright, so there's going to be a little confusion here because, as you can see, the system is all built up, and that's because the previous clip I lost, so I had to sort of reshoot this, but the system was already built. So anyway, all I was trying to show was that there are the fan headers here at the top. A little hard to see here, but there's a CPU fan header, and then there's a pump header at the top of the motherboard. And then we've got sysfan headers for the system fans. There are 5. So here is 5 and 4, which means there are 3, 2, and 1 somewhere here. So this is 3. I've got a fan plugged in. And then 2 and 1. So there are 5 system fans and 2 fans for the fan headers for the pump and the CPU fans. Now down here at the bottom, the other thing I was trying to show was that we've got these J-Rainbow headers here. One of them is a 4-pin, as you can see. The one next to it is a 3-pin. I'll unplug that. And the voltages are different between the two, so you can't interchange them, and these sockets here are different also. This one is a 3-pin with one of them plugged off or blocked off. And the voltages are different. So the 4-pin header here is actually 12 volts, and these headers here that are 3 pins are 5 volts. So the next clip here I sort of talk about that a little more. And actually these are your J-Rainbow headers. So there's actually a second 5-volt 3-pin header, and it is up here, right here at the top. So you've got 2 of those. Let's see, there's a Thunderbolt header. You've got a couple of USB 2.0 headers, and that really covers most of the, let's see, actually this switch turns your RGB on and off if you want. You can enable and disable it basically. So these are the heat sinks. These are your Frozer heat sinks, and I took the screws out already. So let's just lift these off. That one's a little stuck. Alright, and they have the thermal pads already on the back side, so you peel the sticker off there before you put any of your drives on there. But they actually have a second thermal pad on the bottom, and again you peel the sticker off when you install the drive. Don't take the pad off, just take the sticker. Sometimes the pad wants to come with it. So what is interesting here, actually there are 3 drives, 3 slots for your M.2 drives, and this one here uses this little special release that you push, and it releases the heatsink. So you push it in and it sort of lifts off, and you've got a couple of pins there, and they engage the slots right there. So it's a screwless design. So this is your M.2 slot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this slot here is Gen 5. The others are all Gen 4. And the drive I'll be using is a Mushkin Gamma M.2, and it is a Gen 4. I don't have any Gen 5 drives right now. I'm supposed to get one, but I don't know when, and I don't know exactly what model. But as soon as I do, I'll get it on here. Now, some of these on the back, and it's really hard to see, but it says Gen 5. It's sort of embossed in there. And it's a little hard to see, but it does say Gen 5 or Gen 4. This one is Gen 5, and this one says Gen 5, but it's actually a Gen 4. And your large heat sinks here for the VRM is pretty much identical to the one used on the Z690. It looks very similar. And your battery is actually tucked away in here vertically. They sort of turn it up on end. They used to be out in the middle of the motherboard, but for space reasons they tuck it in there. And the slot here, I should say socket, it's your LGA 1700, same socket that you find on the Z690. And whatever you do, you don't want to touch the pins. That's what the plastic cover is for. But before I put the CPU in, I always do a quick inspection to make sure the pins all look good, and these all do look good. And we'll go ahead and get the CPU installed. Now this is the i9-13900K. If you look at the bottom left corner, you see a little gold triangle, and there's actually one on the cover. You can sort of see it at the bottom left. And you very gently drop it in, and it only goes in one way, and there's some little notches in the PC board. Again, so this can only go in one way, but very carefully lower it into position and make sure it's seated. And it can only go in one way. And then we close the clamps for the socket. I like to get the socket cover off there before I close it. That just pops off. And make sure you save that in case you ever have to send the board back. An RMA will require that cover. So now we'll get the clamps engaged. It always feels like you're using way too much force, but that's what it takes. All right. So the next step is to get everything assembled, get the cooler on there, and fire it up. And we'll get the solid state drive on there first. We'll get the little cover peeled off. And then we'll put the drive in. And you want to come in at about a 30-degree angle. And you'll feel it engage when you push. You don't want to push too hard. And then you lower it. And I like this little easy lock mechanism. Just rotate it around there and the drive is locked in place, and that's it. And since we don't have a heatsink on there, some of these drives have heat sinks, but since we don't, we can actually use the one that comes with the board. So get that little cover peeled off and line the pins up with the slots. And now I could actually put this M.2 in any of these positions and it would function fine since it is a Gen 4 SSD. I could put it in the Gen 5 slot, but it would only operate at Gen 4 speeds. And your PCIe slots, now this one is Gen 5, this one is Gen 4, and then this one is Gen 3. So I'll go ahead and get these heat sinks attached. I like the way this motherboard looks with these heat sinks all installed. Okay, now we'll take a look at some of the screenshots from the BIOS. These are from when I first fired the system up. Initially, you can see we've got a Core i9-13900K, which is a great CPU, but you'll see we are not using that currently. And for some reason, As I was doing some of the testing, the 13900K died. Not really sure what happened. I wasn't really pushing it that hard, and I tested it in 2 other motherboards to see if I could get it to come back to life, and it would not. So I think it is simply dead, unfortunately. So we're moving along with a 12600KF, which is certainly no 13900, but for now that's what we're going to be running with. I also started off with some lower speed memory, and I'll show you what we're currently using here in just a moment. But looking through these screenshots, the first one here, this is where you can select your XMP profile. The current memory only has a selection of XMP1. Some of them have XMP2 and even XMP3. But this memory is a slower speed, 5600. And I believe we're running 6800 now with some Corsair memory, but I'll show you that here in just a moment. The next screenshot, as we walk through some of these here, again, this shows you where you can get your XMP information, and that's important to make sure that's enabled when you fire your system up so that you can take advantage of your maximum memory speed, or the capabilities that your memory has. We move to the third one here. We're looking at our CPU frequency. I was able to get an overclock, stable overclock at around 5.8 gigahertz on the 13900K, and we'll see what we can get with the 12600. Of course, it won't be quite that high. Moving to the next one, this shows you where you can select between your overclocking and your regular settings. So as you move into the overclocking, actually this is the settings screen, so this is where you can set all of your peripheral settings, such as your USB configuration, the integrated peripherals, integrated graphics configuration, and you can look at your PCIe slots. The next one, yeah, this is where you dig into your overclocking if you want to take it to that level. And the last one here is your hardware monitoring, so you can get into the BIOS. Now there's software that you can control the fans when you're in your operating system, but if you want to do it at the BIOS level, you can get in there and adjust your fan speeds based on whatever temperature threshold. So this is a nice way to monitor that, again, from within the BIOS. So this is the current test system now. Again, we're using the 12600KF CPU there under the cooler. We've got the Vengeance memory, which is, let's see, DDR5, 32 gigabytes, 6800 megahertz, and it seems to be running just fine at that speed. And then we're using a 4070 Super here for the graphics card. And one thing to keep in mind, the 13900K, the TDP, or the thermal design power, is like 250, 253 watts. The 12600KF here, the TDP, or the thermal design power, is only 125 watts, so considerably different. This will not dump anywhere near the heat that the 13900K will, which just means that this will be a little more manageable, and your CPU cooler, whichever you choose to use, will be much less stressed. Okay, now I'll go over the software that comes with the motherboard. This is called MSI Center, and it has a lot of functionality. Some people don't like the software that comes with the motherboards, and every motherboard manufacturer has their own system that they've developed to supply with the motherboard. None of this is necessary. Your system will run fine without it, so if you don't like the overhead, some people call it bloatware, but I've not had any problems. I've been using it on 4 of my MSI systems, no problems. But again, you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but if you do like it, it is nice. And it's really convenience, because all of this, again, is available and customizable through your BIOS. If you want to go into it that way, this just makes it convenient. So for example, the MSI AI engine, let's see, it uses AI to provide real-time optimized system adjustments based on the usage context. I've turned it off and on. I haven't really noticed too much difference, but then again, I haven't paid that much attention to it. I guess you got visual. I see. Maybe I didn't have these checked before. That might be the reason I didn't notice anything. So anyway, we can come back up here to the features. All these little modules, you can customize which ones are installed if you like. Over here in the settings, we can check to make sure the system is always updated. Like right now I'm on 2.0.38.0, and you'll see occasionally it'll let you know that there's an update available. I like it in dark mode. There's light mode. Let's see, other features. Another one that I like to use, you can go in here to Mystic Light and you can adjust or customize the lighting features between the motherboard and other components that are plugged in, if you like that. Support, this is where you do the update, and it will scan your system to see what drivers or utilities need to be updated. So I've got some things here. So I'm not going to use Norton, and I don't need the Ada Extreme. I already have another version of Ada installed, so I will ignore that. You hit the advanced here and it will check the BIOS to see if the BIOS needs updated. So you can actually update the BIOS through this. So again, I like the MSI Center. I've not had any problems with it. You can use it if you like, or you can choose to not install it at all. And there is one last thing I want to point out here. Under support up here at the top, you click on that and you go over to service and you click on that. It brings up this really cool page here. So we've got a lot of troubleshooting articles. We've got support articles that you can read. So if you click on one of these, how to set up the BIOS function, it brings you to that page at the MSI website, which is very nice. We've got the MSI forum that will take you to that if you click there. We've got the how-to channel. This is nice. You click there and it opens a YouTube channel for the MSI how-to channel, actually is what that is. We've got all these little videos that show you how to set your system up, and it will probably answer a lot of your questions. So that is very nice and very convenient. We also have, it looks like web tickets if you have an RMA you want to check on. Hotline, and then service locations. As for gaming, all the games I've played here, I haven't really noticed any difference between a high-end motherboard, a mid-range motherboard, or a lower-end or entry-level motherboard. As far as functionality, it comes down to your graphics card. That is going to be more of a determining factor. Games are not really CPU bound like they used to be years ago, so even a mid-range CPU for the most part will be just fine. I mean, yeah, the higher end CPUs will get you a few more frames per second, but nothing you're really going to notice. Put your money into a graphics card if you're doing a lot of gaming. Now, as for pricing, the Z790 Carbon Wi-Fi motherboard right now is on Amazon for around $375. There is actually a Carbon Wi-Fi 2 version out there, and it's about $399, so call it $400. The only difference really, and I kind of scanned through the specs between the two, the only difference I can really see, significant difference, is the Wi-Fi 2 has Wi-Fi 7, this has Wi-Fi 6E. So if you have a router that's capable of Wi-Fi 7, or you plan on getting one, then you might want to go that route. Wi-Fi 6E is certainly plenty fast. But I can say that I've been using this motherboard for a while now. I've become very comfortable, very familiar with it. And my impression is it's rock solid. I have not had any issues with it. I like the multiple M.2 slots that are available for the latest NVMe SSDs. We do have one PCIe Gen 5. If you don't have a PCIe Gen 5 SSD, then you won't be able to take advantage of those speeds. And honestly, the PCIe Gen 4 speeds are still screaming fast. I don't know that you'd really be able to take advantage of those speeds unless you're moving large volumes of data back and forth between drives, or maybe onto a server somewhere. You know, if you put your OS on the PCIe Gen 5 versus a Gen 4, I don't know that you would notice a difference in system performance or functionality at all. In the back here, you've got the latest 2.5 gigabit Ethernet connection, which is probably overkill for most home networks. But again, if you need to upgrade your network speed, you've already got a motherboard that's capable of it. You got the Wi-Fi 6E. We're capable of running the latest high-speed DDR5 memory, and we go all the way up to 14th generation CPUs there from Intel, until the next socket comes out, of course, which should be later this year. But your latest generation, 14th generation, as long as you have the latest BIOS update on the motherboard, you should be able to run any of those CPUs without any problems. So given the feature set with this motherboard, the pricing is right in line with other motherboards with similar feature sets. And the competition is always pretty much neck and neck regardless of the manufacturer. But I can say of all the MSI motherboards that I've had, I've not had any problems with them. They've all performed flawlessly over the years. I would give this the Overclockers Club Gold Award. Wait just a moment, hang on. A little teaser here before you go. The next review will be for this MSI Z790 Ace from MSI, complete with some greasy fingerprints on the box. So stick around for the next review. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.